We meet a woman named Grace, who is driving along a highway at night with her son Evan. They are discussing something, and suddenly an SUV crashes into their car, which immediately fled the scene of the accident. Since then, the family's life has been turned upside down. Grace managed to survive, but little Evan could not be saved. After some time, the family decided to sell their house and move to a new place. Grace takes this grief very hard, and Lucy, her husband's daughter from the first marriage, was expelled from school for using illegal substances. Philip, the head of the family, works as a psychiatrist and has to listen to patients with their problems day after day. One day, one of the patients, named Daphne, shared with the man that she finally managed to break off the relationship with her boyfriend, named Eric, who was a real psychopath, and sought to control her in everything. We see Philip giving a lecture at an institute of psychiatry. The man tells us about a patient from his practice, Daphne, whom he named Mary to preserve doctor-patient confidentiality. The girl was from a wealthy family, the youngest of 2 children, her mother suffering from depression and her father from bipolar disorder. When Daphne was 11 years old, her mother had taken her own life, and since then the girl had also had a series of attempts to leave her life. No treatment helped Daphne. Then the doctor tried a new, radical way of psychotherapy, which consisted in communicating with the patient as an equal, as a similarly desperate person, and sharing his own problems, and since then Daphne quickly went on the mend. She is now 22 and her life has improved. After the lectures, Philip was approached by his colleague, Vanessa. The woman said she was worried about him and his wife, but Philip assured her that everything was fine, and they agreed to meet the 2 families for dinner tonight. On the way home, however, Philip received a call from Daphne informing him that her best friend Joan had passed away, having been hit by a car and the driver had fled the scene. The doctor said that he would come to the girl right away, but Daphne assured him that she could handle it and promised that she would come to the appointment tomorrow and they would discuss everything there. That evening at dinner, the police showed up on the doorstep. It turned out that Daphne had taken her own life by jumping off the roof. At the scene, her brother James tried to get to her body, beyond the cordoned-off area. Philip approached him and offered his condolences. James blamed himself for everything. The next day Vanessa advised Philip to take a vacation to think things over, because the death of a patient was a great tragedy. The man promised to think about it. Soon James arrived at his house, wanting to see Philip, but Grace and Lucy opened the door for him. James informs him that he wants to give Philip back the book he gave Daphne to read. Grace invites James to dinner and he agrees. During dinner, a man tells his new friends that he has recently written a novel casting shadows. Grace and Lucy find themselves charmed by the guest. The next day, Philip stops by to see Vanessa's husband, who works at a publishing house. The man asked him to find the book Casting Shadow as he had not been able to order it anywhere. Meanwhile, Lucy returns from her new school. Classmates laugh at the girl as they know about the history with illegal substances. Lucy walks alone near the lake, and at some point James approaches her. After a short conversation, the man called Lucy to a cafe, where they spent some time talking. At Vanessa's request, Philippe went into her office. It turned out that a complaint had been received against the man, in which a certain anonymous person accused him of Daphne's death. As dean of the faculty, Vanessa is obligated to respond to the complaint. At this time, Lucy was returning home and was escorted home by James. The man suggested that they become friends, and the girl agreed. In the evening, Grace informs her husband that James has asked her for help, as he needs the services of a realtor to sell his sister's house. Philip is not thrilled about it, but does not forbid his spouse to work. The next day Grace arrived at James' house, where a frank conversation took place between them. Grace told him how her son Evan had been killed in an accident while she was driving him from hockey practice. Grace felt that James understood her as well as anyone, since he too had recently lost someone very close to him. After the case with Daphne, Philippe began to be rejected by his patients, as they believed that his psychotherapy could bring them to the same state. In addition, Philippe began to have conflicts with his daughter. The girl constantly went somewhere, explaining that she was studying, but her father did not believe her. It turns out that in fact, Lucy spent time with James. During one of these meetings, the girl opened up to the guy and told him that after the death of her stepbrother, their lives have completely changed, because before the father and stepmother were very fond of each other, but now each of them withdrew into himself. James supports Lucy in every possible way. In the evening, Philip receives a call from Vanessa and learns that another anonymous complaint has been received about the man, and this time the anonymous threatens to complain to higher authorities. Lucy comes home late. The girl thinks about James all the time, as does her stepmother. Grace, secretly from her husband, has also met James many times, feeling in him support and understanding. Philip immediately sensed something wrong, and the next day he went to James' house. The father of the family asked James to find another realtor, to which James stated that he had changed his mind about selling the house anyway. The man also assured Philip that he was not his enemy. Soon after, Philip pays Vanessa a visit. The man is sure that James is behind all those anonymous notes, but Vanessa is still skeptical. Later that evening, Lucy met with James again. The girl told him that her stepmother had been acting strangely lately. Then they went to a bar, where they had fun. But at some point Lucy noticed the arrival of friends of her family, and she and James had to discreetly leave. While they were in the car, Lucy said that she would like to run away with him when he sold his sister's house. Suspecting his wife of infidelity, Philip began to follow Grace. At first he did not notice anything suspicious, but after work Grace went to see James. The woman told him that everything that had happened between them was a mistake, but then passion took over. Philip was sitting in his car outside James' house at the time, fantasizing about taking down his rival. Philip couldn't believe his wife was with James. As soon as James was alone, the man called the appropriate authority and stated his intention to file a formal complaint against the doctor. Soon after, Vanessa informed Philip that he was being stripped of his medical license while the complaints were being investigated. Vanessa now believes that James is behind it all and asks her colleague to look for any leads. Meanwhile, Lucy and James are together in his yacht and planning an escape. But when James goes out for a drink, Lucy sees an incoming call from Grace on his phone. The girl decides that James is spying on her at the request of her parents. However, the man convinces the girl that he is communicating with Grace solely about the sale of the house, and the girl believes him. James asks Lucy to go home and pack her things, and at night they will run away together. Grace is tormented by guilt. In the evening, she and her husband have a frank conversation. Philip asks his wife to forgive him for the fact that after the death of Ewan, he distanced himself from her and left her alone with her grief. Also, the man said that he knows about her relationship with James and does not hold a grudge, considering that only himself is to blame for the situation. Lucy waits for a call from James, but the phone is silent. Then the girl tries to call him herself, but James does not answer. The next day there was no news from him either, and Lucy realized that she was deceived. After work, Grace finds that her car does not start, and the lady needs to urgently go to the pharmacy to get medicine for Lucy. The woman was approached by James, who called tech support, where he was told he would have to wait about an hour for tech support. After that, the man offered Grace to drive her there and back. After some hesitation, the lady agreed. However, James passed the corner they wanted and began to pick up speed. Grace realized that something was wrong and was very frightened. Philip called his wife, but she could not say anything clear. Suddenly James made a sharp maneuver, and Grace hit her head and lost consciousness. Philip rushed to his car and continued to call his wife, but James answered. The man tells the doctor that he will soon feel the same pain he feels. Philip still manages to catch up with the kidnapper, and he continues to chase James with his car. At one point, James pulls into an unregulated intersection and rushes in front of a passing truck, but slows down at the last moment. Philip pulled James out of the car and began beating him. But the truck driver intervened and James managed to escape. In the evening, Philip received a call from Vanessa, who had already had a chance to talk to Grace. The woman advised to go to the police, but Philip had already done so. So far, James is nowhere to be found. Unsuspecting of James and Lucy's connection, the worried parents try to warn their daughter, but she reacts very aggressively. The parents decide it's just adolescence. Soon Philip receives a call on his phone from a colleague at the clinic. The colleague informs him that James is in their care, and it turns out that he is mentally ill and suffers from hallucinations. Also, James keeps mentioning some park in Portland. The patient stated that he would only talk to Philip. At the request of his colleagues, Philippe arrives at the clinic. First, James asks him if he knows Daphne's boyfriend, Eric. Then the patient confessed that Daphne had written down all the details of her and Philip's sessions. James read everything, and thus learned absolutely everything about Philippe's life, his relationship with his wife, his daughter, the death of his son, and everything else. Philip asks for the session to be interrupted as James began to behave inappropriately and was led to a room. The patient asked the doctor to listen to him, as he had not told all the details yet, but Philip did not want to hear anything more. That night Philip was awakened by a phone call. James had somehow managed to get the phone out, and he asked the doctor to explain what the clicking sounds were in his head. The next day, Philip talked to Vanessa, and he said that he didn't want anything more to do with James. His colleague calmed him down and told him that James had been placed in isolation. This evening, Philip and Grace had dinner at Vanessa and her husband's house. Vanessa reported that Philip was getting his license back, and her husband had gotten him the book Casting Shadow, as promised. However, on the back, in a picture of the author, Philip saw a man completely different from James. That's how Philip realized that it wasn't James who had been stalking them all this time, but Eric, Daphne's boyfriend, who was posing as her brother. Eric couldn't accept that Daphne had left him and blamed it on the psychiatrist. Then Eric decided first to destroy Daphne's friend, Joy, and then with the girl. The man set up everything in such a way as if the girl voluntarily decided to leave her life, because of the death of her friend. Philip warned his colleagues from the clinic that they now have a dangerous psychopath in their ward, but at that moment Eric had already killed the orderly and escaped. Eric arrived at Lucy, who at first rejoiced, believing that her lover had come back for her, but then realized that she was trapped. Eric grabbed the girl while Grace and Philip returned home, and on the way called the emergency services. A fight broke out between Philip and Eric, and it wasn't long before Eric started to win. But Grace came to the rescue, attacking Eric with a hockey skate that was left over from Evan. The woman inflicted incompatible injuries on Eric that were incompatible with life. The family was reunited, and that's when the sirens of the arriving police cars were heard. This is the end of the movie. Thank you all for watching this movie to the end. Give this video a like. Write in the comments what you think about this movie, and see you in new videos.